Okay, Nigel, you're live and ready to go.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to everybody who's either in the meeting or observing the meeting. Welcome to the 24th of March meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee at Norfolk. Before I begin official proceedings, so to speak, I just remind everybody with regard to our remote meeting protocols, and I hope we're all familiar with those. I won't go through them, but just be observant that the meeting is being recorded and is being transmitted live on YouTube. So turning to the agenda, item 1 is to receive apologies for absence. I believe we have one, Matt.
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Nigel Housden.
Thank you. Moving to item 2, any substitutes?
Unfortunately, I was not able to secure a substitute for the meeting.
Thank you. Public questions and statements are item 3. I'm not aware of any.
None received.
Okay, thank you. Item 4 is the minutes of the last meeting held on the 10th of February. We could just turn to those, please, and we'll go through them for accuracy, page by page. Page 1, just put your hand up if you have an observation. Page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I've seen no hands raised, so can I take it then that you are all content that they are an accurate record of that meeting and that I should sign it as such? Can I have a show of hands, please?
Yes, it looks unanimous.
Thank you, Matt. I will then sign them in due course. Items of urgent business are item 5. I'm not aware of any items of urgent business.
None received.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Members will be aware that we have a revised protocol with regard to the declaration of members' interests. I see we don't have a copy of those in the current minutes, Matt, or not in mine anyway.
Yeah,
sorry,
so
in the papers.
Apologies, I missed off that that flow chart, but I will obviously set it as a default for the agendas going forward.
Yes, thank you. So I think members have seen that flow chart and are familiar with the prompts and reminders in regard to declarations of interest. So does anybody have any declarations of interest in respect of today's business? I see no hands raised. Right, okay, thank you. Item 7 then, petitions from members of the public. I'm not aware of any.
None received.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, I am aware that we have at item 10 2 offices from the Norfolk Police, Chief Inspector Matt Dyson and Sergeant Toby Gosden. Welcome to you both. It is my proposal that we move this item 10 to the next item of business, so that enables you to attend to your other business on completion of this, rather than having to observe us work our way through our normal agenda. So unless anybody has any objections to that, I will bring that item forward. I see no hands raised. Thank you. And so I will hand over then at this point to Chief Inspector Matt Dyson. Before I do, I am aware that I think members of the committee have had the opportunity of raising any particular points that they wish to raise. I haven't been cited on what they might be, but I think I would be right in saying that much of our interest will feature on domestic violence and other policing trends arising out of the COVID-19 campaign. So that will also include working with the North Norfolk District Council's COVID marshals. So with that brief introduction, I'll hand over to you, Chief Inspector Dyson. You are muted at the moment. You are still muted. You briefly unmuted.
I just went to click unmute and then, yeah, we got it.
Thank you. You'll have to excuse my ignorance on Zoom. This is only the second time we've been on it. We don't usually use it as a vehicle conferencing platform. We usually use Teams, so schoolboy error. But morning to you all. Morning, Mr. Blatch. It's certainly a pleasure to be welcomed to your group to give a presentation. If I just start with introductions, and kindly you've started me off. So my name's Matt Dyson. I'm a Chief Inspector. I'm responsible for 2 districts of policing. The first is Great Yarmouth, and the latter one is North Norfolk. So actually, when you look at that as a geographical area, that is most of East Coast Norfolk, actually, which is obviously relevant, and similar districts in some ways, but very different in many others. I have with me, and I'm grateful to have him with me, a locally known figure. Toby, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning all. Thank you, sir. Yeah, I'm Toby Gosden. I'm the Neighbourhood Sergeant for North Norfolk. So I cover all of the neighbourhoods type of policing, so community policing for North Norfolk. I also manage the Marine Police for Norfolk. So we have a boat at Hoverton covering 125 miles of Norfolk Broads. And we also have a RIB out at Wells that covers the coastal tidal areas of Morstan, Blakeney and Wells. So I look after all the community policing and the Marine Police, and lots of jobs in between. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we were initially asked to come as support, actually, to the PCC. Our PCC, Mr. Green, I think it's scheduled to give you all a presentation on domestic abuse, focused on domestic abuse. So we're initially asked to attend, really to support him in his presentation, to be available to answer any operational questions. Unfortunately, he's had to send his apologies. So I'd kind of start by saying that this is not Mr. Lawn's presentation, but our presentation on some of the themes that you've kindly provided to us and some of the questions we've tried to weave in. But the only caveat I would say is we've had kind of limited time with the notice to prepare prep. So hopefully I cover most of the areas. If not, we can obviously certainly take things outside the meeting and try to resolve following the conclusion of the meeting. I'm happy to take, or we're both happy to take questions as we go along, or what I'll do is we'll present slide by slide, and then I'll probably ask if there are any questions before we move on to the next slide. So there should be some opportunities for questions. If Matt, I think you're going to share the presentation with everyone if you can.
Yep, absolutely. Just give me a second. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
Yes. Yes.
Matt, is it possible to do it in slide show mode? Just because it would probably be a little bit larger for all the members. Thank you, perfect. Okay, so if we move on to slide 2, So the presentation is gonna start with COVID, really. So it's going to talk about some of the activity that the police have done over the last 12 months in response to COVID. It's also going to look forward at the road ahead that mapped out by the government in relation to the sort of moving into new phases and certainly less restrictions than we've all been faced so far. There's a slide on performance, which is kind of some crime data really, but I will pick out some themes from that crime data, and I'll try to give a little bit of a look and feel in more specifically in relation to domestic abuse, and also what we call opradium, which relates to fraud-based activity. Toby's going to give a little bit of a presentation on ANPR cameras and our capability in North Norfolk, and we'll finish up on engagement. And as I said, we're happy to take questions as we go through. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Matt. So we're starting with COVID. We're starting with COVID really because COVID has had a massive impact on the population, on all of us, and it's certainly had a massive impact on policing as we know it. It also gives me an opportunity to apologise for my hair. I haven't had a haircut in about 4 or 5 months, but I am scheduled to have one at 9 o'clock on the 12th of April, but it's a long overdue. When COVID first came in from a lockdown perspective, I remember having some personal thoughts to myself really, and thinking that the police are now going to be responsible for policing in the main law-abiding good members of public, and in you know, the members of public facing some real personal challenges themselves, and the difficulty and challenge in us trying to balance that with our current sort of policing model of policing by consent. So officers have largely used the 4 E's, the engage, explain, encourage, and the last, enforcement. And they've been working with partners and local authorities to through the process of the last 12 months in relation to COVID matters. I'm aware obviously of the positive stories and the positive news in relation to the vaccination program, which seems to continually run successfully. And also, of course, we've all be aware of the significant reductions in the amount of cases that we've recently had. From a policing perspective, some of the risks to us have been around the kind of hidden risks of COVID, increases in domestic abuse, which I'll go on to, and also exploitation with you know, children, opportunities for them to report. Not as easy as certainly attending school on a regular basis and having communication with other trained professionals. So the slide that you all can see has got 2 diagrams on. They're both obviously maps of North Norfolk. You'll recognise that area. The one on the left kind of represents for us the total amount of reports that we've had over that given period. So it gives a breakdown of the plethora of over 4,000 reports from members of the public that relate to health order reports. It shows some of the hotspot locations. You can see some hotspot locations in the data, and you know, it's really it's across the board of North Norfolk, as you'll see. The map on slide 2 is it's not 12 months of data, but it's 3 months of data. And that's only because our systems can only churn out 3 months at a time in kind of this visual format. But what it does is it shows the amount of policing activity linked to COVID. So in that 3-month period, we've issued 183 fixed penalty notices. 150 COVID warnings have been formally issued. We've had 327 engagement events. And there's been a real focus really from the members of the publics and yourselves and reports from local parish councils around areas of concern and areas where breaches are perceived to be happening, for us being hopefully visible and being able to police them in hopefully a relatively balanced way. You'll have to excuse my phone. Okay. Just so recently our activity has been focused a lot of the coastal areas. Walcott stands out, Horsey, Seapooling, Wells, but certainly the more urban towns across North Norfolk as well. And there's been some sterling work that Toby will talk about in a little bit more detail in relation to working with NNDC COVID support officers. Looking at COVID from a policing perspective in trying to look forward to the road ahead, we're aware obviously that on the 29th of March, the message changes from stay at home to stay local. Some of the early guidance in relation to what stay local actually means is minimizing travel where you can. On the 12th of April, outdoor settings are opening, local attractions, self-contained accommodation and campsites, and there's a bit of a question mark in relation to that. Before I came to this meeting, I did have some communications with our COVID team. So we have a centralised, as you'd probably expect, COVID team, and really just discussed with them their perspectives of that challenge around the police interpreting some of the government guidelines and advice and legislation. And the updates from them is really that it's to be debated in Parliament, that a paper we have got, we are in receipt of a government paper, but following the debates in Parliament, we'll be liaising obviously with our Norfolk Constabulary legal team to try to interpret what that means for policing and how police actually use that the messages to hopefully effectively police as we come out of the restrictions. To date, I haven't seen any clear clarity myself forbidding cross-county travel in relation to the de-restricted period, or placing actual mileage on the distance that people can travel. That's obviously highly relevant to North Norfolk with the many beauty spots that you have. And suffice to say, before I hand over to Toby, we expect in policing terms 2021 to be a really busy year. When you look at the travel bans, certainly internationally, that seem to be in place, when you look at the holiday bookings and lettings being booked locally, we expect it to really be quite busy. So we're tracking in detail really some of the bigger events across North Norfolk and other districts, and trying to staff adequately and have resources, trying to work out exactly what we expect the demand to be, if that makes sense. So I'll hand over to Toby now, who's also going to talk a little bit more about COVID, and then we'll open it up for any questions.
Good morning, thank you, sir. As I said earlier, my team are responsible for the visibility and engagement across North Norfolk. I've got beat managers in all the 7 towns of North Norfolk. Their main responsibilities are engagement with hard-to-reach communities, with schools, children's homes, mental health hospitals. So they've got their daily business anyway. When COVID came along, they ended up having to pick up a lot of the engagement activity for COVID patrols. So part of my role daily would be to monitor and sort of analyse where we're getting reports of second homeowner use, where we're getting reports of people travelling to beauty spot locations, and obviously, as the boss has alluded to, Seapooling, Horsey are sort of common areas for people travelling from outside of Norfolk to come and go on the beach and see the seals. So my team would be responsible for liaising with partner agencies such as Norfolk District Council, work alongside their COVID support officers and conducting joint patrols. And on top of that, working with the council and other landowners to try and combat problems. So an example would be Horsey. Obviously, we spoke to Robin at Horsey and he was prepared to shut the car park at Horsey. By working together, we can sort of pretty much eradicate and try and problem solve those areas that are being hit by travellers coming to see the seals from outside of Norfolk. So on a daily basis, it would be looking at CADs, looking at the demand where we're getting reports of second homeowners, looking at where people are travelling, putting officers in the right place, working with partner agencies. And then it would be looking at deployment plans for response officers as well. We couldn't do this alone. So the crime type for other crimes across Norfolk had slightly dipped. So your traditional crimes such as burglary had dropped because people were in their homes, so burglaries dropped. So we had a bit of spare capacity within our response teams. So I'd make a deployment plan for the response teams. We'd have a dedicated COVID car each day, and then I'd task them where to go and what to work on each day. So it seemed to work really well over time, just putting officers in the right place at the right time with the help of partner agencies. I think that is it for my bit, sir. Thank you.
So at this point, I'll just ask if there are any further questions in relation to COVID or comments. Okay, so moving on to performance.
Sorry, I think we have got, I can see Councillor Dixon and then we've got Wendy Fredericks and Harry Blathwaite.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Matt and Toby, for that so far. I just wanted to expand a little bit, if you're not planning to do that. In respect of domestic abuse, I wonder if you could tell us whether there are, what trends there were, and whether or not any of those might relate to how the district council might provide support or feedback with respect to the incident, so that we can take that feedback into account in the delivery of the services that we provide. Is there anything that would be relevant to that in terms of trends?
In terms of trends, we have seen increases. It would probably be expected during this period, and with households, isolating and staying in much more. So there is a slide on domestic abuse actually, but we've seen about a 20% increase in domestic related crime over the period of last 12 months, and 11% increase in non-domestic related crime. So we have seen increases. The data hasn't been broken down in more detail. Suffice to say that we have seen some increases across the district. Absolutely. It probably isn't fair to link all of it to COVID, but of course, households being inside for prolonged periods of time, or more prolonged periods of time, and people being off of work, the pressures, are a mix of probably different reasons.
Okay, thank you very much.
There's no feedback that I've got in relation to NNDC specifically. Nothing specifically from the data that I've observed or that I've received back from our analyst in relation to this. Is there anything from yourself, Toby, in relation?
Yeah, funny enough, so I attended a meeting yesterday, and one of the other districts actually mentioned that each month before our monthly management meeting, they receive all the council data with regards to your call types and repeat callers, problem areas, and it may include housing associations data as well in terms of where they're getting reports of ASB, domestic violence and noise, which could all overlay with the police data. And then using our operational partnership team embedded within the council, we could cross-reference the calls that come into the council with the calls that come into the police and make sure we're aware of them first of all, and that then we can make sure we can deal with any of those that might fall into police remit. So it's using the council data overlaid with police just to work on it together with the council and the police using the OPT.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Toby. That's the kind of thing that I was looking for, and whether or not there was at this stage any feedback that you might be able to give us in relation to the way in which we work as a partner with you, and whether or not there are any changes that we might be able to make to the services that we deliver that might contribute to better outcomes. So that's the kind of thing that I was looking for. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
From a district perspective, lead perspective, the joint patrols with the COVID marshals have been, fantastic really, and involve that kind of joint working and targeted response to hotspot locations.
Thank you for that.
I was just going to suggest, Matt, I don't know if you agree that rather than taking kind of questions through, did you want to get through your presentation and go to the end in case there are questions relating to later slides?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So moving on to the next slide. So next slide is performance. This slide relates to crimes in kind of categories, really. Our main categories for the last 12 months. I've worked out the averages on the right side by kind of quite crudely, really, just dividing the figure by 12. But I've done that to try to give an indication of actually on a month-by-month basis, crime for North Norfolk is relatively speaking, and in comparison with other districts, really quite low. The figures aren't broken down into further smaller areas, as in what we would call our local policing commands or beat codes, but this is at kind of district level. Some explanation about the categories. So violence against a person includes injury and non-injury violence. It also includes stalking and harassment type offences. Within those reports, there can be technical assaults with siblings on siblings. It can relate to reports from mental health hospitals, as well as obviously other parties. Some of the reason why that's much larger is really because of the harassment type offences that are now categorised within that banding. If we have reported to us a couple of crimes, say a criminal damage and assault against the same party, not only are we required to crime the criminal damage and the assault, we would also be required to crime a case of harassment. Now, it may be that we proceed and are able to charge the suspect with the criminal damage and assault, and there wouldn't be a useful purpose for charging also for the harassment. So it gives some context, hopefully, in relation to some of the figures. The burglary listed, it does show that includes residential and business community burglary. So it's the plethora of burglaries that can be committed. Headline positives for me, very low on robberies, unheard of in comparison to other districts to just have 4 in a 12-month period. So really positive in relation to that. For burglary residential, which aren't contained within the figures, but there's 112 residential burglaries. Now, over the period of 12 months, that works out at just one every 3 days for North Norfolk, to give an approximate indication. And huge geographical area that North Norfolk covers. We see some challenges in relation to what we would describe as rural crime, and that would be your arsons, your criminal damage, your theft, your burglary, your agricultural crime. But again, only 84 for the last 12 months, which really hopefully highlights some of the challenges with policing that 10 per month with the size of the district and the area that resources are required to patrol. The violence against the person increases are largely due to the harassment and stalking, as I've kind of set out. Previous period was 4,660 in total. So there have been some rises from the last 12 months to the previous 12 months prior. Most of them rises can be attributable to what we would call miscellaneous crimes, and that would be a plethora of other types. So handling, dangerous driving, some wildlife crime, other forgery, and threats to commit criminal damage. So they seem to be the main reasons why we've had some rises. The rise is plus 54 for between last year or this year and the year before. So the general look and feel from me is that actually it's a quite positive picture for North Norfolk. You would have seen probably in the press and some of the messages from Norfolk Constabulary about activity relating to county lines and drug dealing. We don't have any tier 1 or tier 2 county lines groups impacting on North Norfolk, which is really positive. We conduct ourselves what are called TCG processes, which are tasking and coordination group processes and performance meetings on a monthly basis, where we're furnished with a product from our analytical services, and that is intended to inform emerging issues, trends, and we try to prioritize police activity in relation to some of the trends and emerging issues and threats that are contained. I haven't got anything else I was going to add on this slide, but I was then going to move on to the next slide about domestic abuse and just talk a little bit more in a little bit more detail in relation to domestic abuse, which is obviously contained within the figures. So domestic abuse is always going to remain high priority for the local teams. It obviously encompasses vulnerability, risk. There's a real focus from the local policing teams about officers engaging professionally with victims and people reporting, wearing and activating body-worn video to secure evidence and to record the context and conditions often of a given situation. And we focus on early intervention, so arresting where we can, or certainly taking positive action, and also management of risk through bail conditions where we can. Some of our strategy also relates to trying to maximise the opportunities for what we would describe as victimless prosecution. You'll see on the slide that 54% of victims of domestic abuse don't support prosecution. That presents in itself to the police huge challenges in relation to trying to take a case forward when sometimes the victim isn't confident to share the details of actually what's happened or won't provide a statement. But we would consider the evidence collectively and holistically and see if we've got enough to proceed and take action, and give the victim some time with some follow-ups. Specifically, around 5% are positive outcomes from domestic investigations, but so relatively low, actually, a relatively low positive outcome rate for domestics. I haven't got a slide separately on harassment, but I did note in some of the questions that we were provided before the meeting, there was quite a few questions on harassment. So what I've got is some notes to hopefully cover some of the points on harassment that I can answer. So we had 273 harassment investigations for North Norfolk. 33 of those were domestic related. Harassment has increased by about 32%. What is relevant is what I said before around the recording of the offence of harassment. We may be recording offences that are perceived to be harassment, but we wouldn't necessarily proceed to charge and take action. 48% of harassment domestic related, the victim won't support police action. 21% of harassment reports relate to being online. What I would say in relation to that is it's not necessarily always a clear distinction. Usually when we have a report of harassment reported to us, it usually involves a plethora of different activity, either drive-bys, contacting by the phone, some social media, so some online, but we don't always get just cases that are online, but we do have them, it's fair to say. Body-worn video do have some impacts, definitely, in relation to our ability to present evidence to lawyers to make a decision. Absolutely. So they can show the condition of a premises, they can show the demeanour of the suspect, they can also show the impacts that it's had on the victim, and that can tell 1,000 words really, just for a lawyer to see it themselves or a jury to see that themselves. And that's probably it for me on domestic violence. Is there anything you think I've missed, Toby?
No, not really, sir. I mean, all I was going to mention is obviously there's a massive difference between recording standards. So if someone makes an allegation, and this goes back to all of the different crime types, if someone makes an allegation of a burglary, for instance, and they say someone's been in my house, we go there, there's clearly mental health issues, the house is like Fort Knox. Because she has reported a burglary and she believes she's been a victim of burglary, or he or she, we have to record a burglary dwelling on our system. Now, we're quite confident that burglary hasn't happened, but because of government Home Office crime recording standards, we have to record a burglary. So when we're talking about positive figures, positive rates of sort of prosecution, a lot of it is because actually an offence may not have actually happened, but we have to record it. So that just sort of gives some context really around the differences between recording standards and charging standards is what we need, what CPS require us evidentially to take a case to court. And there's a huge difference between an allegation of a crime, which we have to record, and actually the evidential standard of what we can take to court based on the evidence of that particular crime type. So there's a huge difference, which may sort of give some context to some of those figures. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Any questions before I move on? Okay, thank you.
We do have, I suppose their question is on domestic abuse. Is it Liz, Wendy, I think first, and then Harry.
Thank you, Matt.
Hi, thank you. Oh, sorry, Liz, are you first?
No, you go first, Darren. You're well.
Sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing because I've got American jets over my house at the moment. So thank you so much, Matt and Toby. Domestic violence and abuse is something that I've been dealing with, not personally, but I've been dealing with survivors and victims. And I've been having very many conversations with them. And it's evident that there are huge gaps in support. Now, I would like to propose, and I've spoken to our communities manager, Sonia Shooter, this morning, and she's behind this as well, is that we echo the government's call for a task force to look into these gaps, having all the stakeholders, you guys, NNDC, and also the survivors and the charities, because we really need to get on top of this. The reasons why women go back, or they do not, or men go back and do not carry on with a prosecution, is that there's quite a few of them that are scared to stay and scared to leave because they just don't know what's out there. Would you be happy to take this offline with me and support that idea? Thank you.
Absolutely, we would be, really interested in any kind of task force put in place, because I think what you say is hugely relevant, and you've alluded to the fact that actually some of these cases have huge significance to the victims, and they can have huge vulnerabilities, and will have obvious concerns around financial commitments, childcare, and it's not just about the case. It's often about the much wider circumstance and support networks, etc., etc. And I think the problem should be considered holistically. So we would be part of that, absolutely. Yeah.
Matt, thank you. Can I email you with that, and perhaps that's fantastic, because that's just great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
I think we had Liz.
Yeah, similar. It was similar actually. So I think most of that's been answered, and I think my question is really, what support do the police need to be able to get that prosecution rate up, and for people to continue those prosecutions? So I'd like to be involved with what Wendy's doing, and and I think that's a forum for that to be discussed in more detail there. So, but thank you for what you've answered today.
Thank you. And we obviously had a good amount of interesting questions from yourself, and I kind of suspect that we haven't come to the meeting with as much detail as you would have perhaps liked, and just apologise, really, that's because of time constraints. Thank you. Okay, shall we move on to Operadium? Oh, I've got one more. I think
it's Harry Blathwaite, I think. Blathwaite.
I think Harry said he's going to wait until the end to ask his question.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so we've moved on to Operadium. So Operadium is our local operation, which is in response to courier fraud. Courier fraud is a national problem. And the MO, if you like, the way the offenders usually do it is they blanket call numerous numbers, probably from a call center, and when they get through to someone who will engage and speak with them, they identify themselves as a bogus police officer to try to trick the person out of money, and sometimes considerable amount of money, which is why we put it on the slide. And what I would say about the numbers slides, the performance slide with the numbers, is, as a police force, we can't base things just on numbers, but on impacts, and often there are really sad stories contained within a number, and that's why we try to look beyond the number, if that makes sense. But this relates obviously to our force response. It's a national issue. We've had 159 incidents reported for Norfolk alone, which we perceive to be really quite high. We've had, out of them 159, 12 reported financial losses by the victim, but as I said, sometimes really quite significant, and sometimes they can suffer from dementia, they can be elderly, and sometimes it can be their life savings. We're talking about multiple sets of thousands of pounds. our response has really been focused about suspect identification and taking action against them. We've had some really good results recently, and we'll continue to have those good results. And locally with the teams, and Toby will come in kind of at this point, but very much on us preventing and trying to raise the awareness with residents and families that have got maybe a father or a mother who's elderly and suffer with dementia, to try to create some form of kind of support network and look out for them. So we've engaged with, we've gone high on media. So there's been a lot of media coverage in relation to it, just to try to raise awareness. We've done a lot of work with banks. We've got a banking protocol where the banks tend to be really quite good now at reporting to the police if a 70-year-old or 75-year-old is trying to withdraw large sums of money, sometimes several £1,000s. It's quite typical that they would give us a call if they had concerns. We've done work with taxis, taxi companies, and you know, with a number of different businesses, as well as writing to obviously parish councils across the district. And we've had some positive success back. So we had one example I can think of is a taxi driver picking up an elderly person in North Norfolk, and they had concerns that they were being tricked out of withdrawing large sums of cash, and they gave us a call, and we were able to then, you know, come in and stop any loss and to investigate it. So really does relate to some really vulnerable people, and continues to be a concern for us, which is why it's a force operation and response at the moment, which is coordinated with our CID investigators and analysts and the local teams focusing on prevention. Is there anything, Toby, you want to add on this slide?
No, just quickly, obviously you mentioned it was two-pronged, really proactive, so it's back to basics really. A lot of the victims were elderly, they don't read social media, so we had to identify a way of how do we actually get the message out to our elder communities. So it's almost back to basics really. It was putting posters in the locations where we knew that elderly folk would congregate, so your banks, your post offices, your taxi ranks, your supermarkets, out on foot, handing out posters to elderly people, talking to them about this particular scam and the actual method in which the people would use when they call them up. So it was back to basics really, out on the streets, just talking about operadium and how it's could target them. In terms of the proactive work, obviously, as the boss said, CRD were involved and actually went higher than CRD. It went to a regional task force who looked at the technology side of things. And within Norfolk Constabulary, we've now employed what we call PDIs, which is police digital investigators. So the crime is getting very technological nowadays. A lot of the crime is done online. A lot of stuff is done on mobile phone networks. You can actually hide your number now and put a different phone number on. So a lot of the phone numbers that were being displayed on elderly people's phones are actually coming up as Norfolk Police number. So when they Googled it, it would actually come up as Norfolk Police. So these police digital investigators use technology, and they actually work with the phone networks to identify where the particular handsets are. And we try to cut off at source. So using those tactics, we arrested a few people in London and some up north as well, just by tracing handsets, working out who they've called and just identifying users of those handsets. So it's just really a story of two halves, really: basic policing on the street and then using technology to capture them in their own county. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, I see we have Wendy Fredericks again, first of all, and then Liz.
Hi, sorry guys, it's me again. How do we contact you with concerns that we have for residents with this kind of problem? Is there an email address that we can use, or what can we do? Thank you.
Well, if there are any concerns, 101 would be our number, or if you you perceive that a crime is actually taking place and, you know, the suspect or a courier has turned up, then it would be 999, actually, to be fair. Toby, for emails on longer term concerns, what would be best?
Yeah, I mean, long term, we've got a few methods now. The report that you can report it now online. So go on the Norfolk Police website and report it now, and that'll generate an incident which will go straight to our control room to be assessed. We've now trialing web chat within our control room, so you can web chat with constabulary, or you can, if you go onto Norfolk Police and go to your local neighbourhood, you can email my team, and each town has its own email address. So that will be SNT Chroma at Norfolk Police. So each town has got its own SNT box. We would pick up the vulnerability side anyway and work with our partners. So if you had a particular issue or concern that wasn't urgent, you could email my team and we'd pick it up and run with it.
Great, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Liz?
Thank you. On mute, Liz.
This is for Toby, really. Going back to your old style policing, I just wonder whether you've thought about the WI, because I know the WI have signed up to the Norfolk Scams thing and are sending stuff out on emails, but you've got a lot, most villages, communities have got a WI. There's more WIs than there are parishes. So you've got a way in there, and I know that they really are concerned about some of their more elderly members on this and would be really keen to work with you, and I think it would give you a good opening.
Yeah, definitely.
I can help you with that if you'd like to do that.
Yeah, no, it'd be great, thanks. I believe that was either considered or actually completed, because our engagement officer, Pete Davison, tried to look at all the different reporting methods, and it was, when I say back to basics, it was trying to get into places like the WI or elderly groups, but also putting pieces in local parish magazines, because the parish magazines were put through everybody's door, and obviously the older generation read them, don't they? Which, you know, the younger person doesn't. So it's just looking at all the different ways we can target those communities.
Okay, Gerard?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Chief Inspector Dyson and Sergeant Gosden. I think that struck me when you were giving your deliberation was the media aspect of it. I completely agree with you that far too many of our residents don't have proper access, don't look at online, and it struck me one of the things that we should try and get across is more media attention via the television. And one of the basic ways of finding out someone if you're being scammed or not is, as you say, they will go fishing. They'll use a load of numbers and try and catch you out. And the best way of tackling this really is that the first question should be asked is their name, and secondly, to give you their telephone number. Now, if they're legitimate, they will give you their telephone number so you can call them back, and obviously a scammer won't. So I think if we could maybe put more of a media attention to educate our elderly, I'm one myself, elderly residents, then I think that would be a benefit and a quick, hopefully, way of stopping some of this scamming. Thank you.
What they've been doing, Gerard, is they cold call, obviously, landlines. When they get an elderly person online, they introduce themselves. They actually tell that person to ring 999 to verify their identity. But what they do, they don't put the phone down the other end. And then in this scammer's control room, I'll call it, someone else then hands over the phone. They pretend to be police control room. It'll be a female voice. And it's almost really sucking people in that way. Very clever, very convincing. So, you know, they try and work other ways to try and sort of buy your trust really and make you think that they are definitely the police.
What we've seen, which has been really positive, or I've seen, because I tend to read probably every crime or most crimes every day, is there seems to have been a real, certainly in the last few months, and you'll see that on that slide, a real rise in October, which is where we did a lot of our work and focused attention that we've been talking about. There seems to have been a real difference in people's reactions, that in the reports I'm reading, victims are saying that I know this is a scam, so I just hung up on them and I didn't give them any details, or, you know, I just immediately cut the call off, which is kind of perfect, really. And we weren't seeing that before, so I think the message is getting out there. But you're absolutely right, Gerard. I'd agree that we need to keep the profile of it really quite big, because some of the impacts on victims can be considerable, actually. Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the next slide, which is engagement. Sorry, ANPR. Sorry, it's your slide.
Thanks, sir. I'll try and speed up. I know we're sort of against the clock at the moment. So ANPR then. So ANPR has been around a long time. Obviously, it started in London many years ago. It's a fantastic intelligence tool for Norfolk Constabulary, and we would sort of like to see an increase in cameras across North Norfolk, but across the constabulary as a whole. We've currently got 5 live locations for ANPR in North Norfolk, and we are looking to get a 6th up and running at the moment. And the way we identify an ANPR site is we look at crime hotspots and look at the main routes into those hotspots. And we have to identify a camera location that would give us what we call a buy-in time. So when it hits the camera, we've got enough time to respond to that activity and go and intercept that car at that location. So the ANPR cameras across North Norfolk spread around all the trunk routes in North Norfolk. They're roadside cameras. They are classed as a policing covert tactic. So we can't give out the locations on a live forum like this. But what we do at the moment is we use the cameras in 3 ways, really. They're used as a reactive tool. So if we have a burglary in a certain area, we'll go back to the nearest cameras and look at what cars have gone through that particular camera. Another example is if we've got a stolen car, we will put the stolen car in the search database. We can then do what's called a convoy check. So we can actually see what car was traveling in front or behind that car at the time the stolen car went through to identify potential offenders. So we use it in a reactive way like that for investigations. We use it proactively, so we can put markers on vehicles. So anything from drug dealers to drug driving to regular drink drivers, no insurance, we can put a whole variety of markers on vehicles. As it goes through a camera, it will ping up on an alarm stack. So most sergeants in North Norfolk are now trained on this system, so they'll have the system running in the background on their computers. An activation will come up and it will say, this car has hit this particular camera. That sergeant will then deploy the nearest unit to go and intercept that vehicle. That's had some really good success in Norfolk, capturing drug drivers, burglary suspects and the like. Now, it is work in progress. The cameras we've got at the moment are third-party funded with big donations from organisations like yourselves, which have meant that we can increase our ANPR activity across North Norfolk. I'll just check my notes, see if I've missed anything. And then obviously on a proactive side as well, we can, instead of just responding to an actual activation at the time and then we're playing catch up, we can use it in a way where actually we can make predictions. So if there's a car that regularly hits a particular camera, we can identify almost in advance that this car is going to hit that camera at that time, and this is the marker on it, and this is who's going to be driving the car at that time. So we can put packages together for frontline officers. So any downtime, they can sit near a camera and almost know beforehand exactly what car's going to come through it and what they're going to be dealing with. So it's a fantastic tool for us. The criminals don't like it. They know that we can identify where particular cars are and what they're doing. We've used it in success for marine crime along North Norfolk. So we've looked at the trunk roads where you would have to go to the marine crime hotspots of St Mawston and Wells. We've got cameras identifying those locations. And in terms of a new location, we're looking at putting a new location online as well, just to cover the one main trunk route we haven't got at the moment. So it's work in progress. We are looking to get more cameras. We are looking to upskill more staff. And working alongside ANPR cameras is a dedicated of what we call a moonshot team, which I'm sure you've seen in the media recently. We've got moonshot teams in the West, Central and in the East in Great Yarmouth. They're a dedicated team of ANPR interceptors. So they're sergeant plus, I think it's 6 staff, isn't it, boss? Yeah. They will use the cameras proactively, working all across North Norfolk and Great Yarmouth, intercepting vehicles. they've had an amazing result. They minimal get at least 2 car seizures a day and a couple of arrests a day in relation to drug driving, theft, drugs offences and the like. So it's a fantastic tool for us. Anything you want to add, boss?
No, as Toby says, really, it's the way we try to control who comes into the area and certainly along the main trunk roads. But the team that Toby's been talking about on Moonshot has been really successful in being a very crime-focused team and some really good proactive results. It's really good. So no, nothing else to add. We used the Moonshot team actually for the radium frauds that we've just talked about. We sent them to fake them for about 4 or 5 days actually, and they are a really good team, and it's nice to share them resources and what we call neighbourhood policing teams, which are plain clothes in the main, with North Norfolk, and to send them to North Norfolk as well. Okay, so moving on to last slide is engagement. So.
Brilliant, thanks, sir. This really is just a quick sort of update really on how COVID has affected engagement. I've talked a fair bit around my team already, which is responsible for visibility and engagement across North Norfolk. I think obviously with the loss of PCSOs, it has left that kind of gap with having police presence on the street, having eyes and ears on the street. So we do rely massively on the public, and it's all about building community relations. It's about building trust within the community, so the community feel that they can come and provide us with information, intelligence. So the beat managers are responsible for that function, along with lots of other functions I've talked about today. So one of the functions is holding a 10 weekly meeting called a Safer Neighbourhood Action Panel, so a SNAP meeting. Due to COVID, they have now gone online using Microsoft Teams. I'm trying to make it as inclusive as possible of as many members of the public, because I think beforehand, when it was a meeting around a table in the parish hall, it kind of ended up just being a few, the original SNAP panel members, which are members that can apply to be on the SNAP panel. They're made up of business persons, parish councillors. It almost felt that a lot of the issues they were bringing forward kind of evolved around their particular town or their particular parish. What we're trying to do is be more inclusive of any community issues that are affecting people that wouldn't generally come and speak to the police. So by holding it online and advertising it online, we've seen quite a few more people engaging with us and actually coming along to the meeting who potentially couldn't have come to a meeting around in a parish hall one evening. So potentially you've got someone who has to look after an elderly person as a carer. They wouldn't have been able to get out. So by holding it online, we're just trying to be more inclusive. What we're trying to do in the research phase as well before a SNAP meeting is just go out to as many different types of communities as we can, just to identify if they've got any issues they would like to bring forward. So I think a good example of that is working with the high schools, going into their school councils and saying, the pupil council, saying what issues affect young people in the community at the moment. And it's actually just trying to gauge those communities that wouldn't generally be involved in a police meeting. That way, when we come to an online SNAP meeting, with the police are bringing forward lots of issues that actually are identified by groups that wouldn't generally engage with us, or not engage with it, but be part of this meeting. So I feel there's actually a benefit to an online meeting, and also the research phase beforehand. Now, I don't know what the meetings are going to look like once COVID is over. I had a meeting yesterday with the Chief Inspector in charge of community safety and community policing. And he said potentially it could be a mixture of the both. We could almost have a physical meeting alongside an online meeting as well, to try and include more and more people. So that is work in progress. All of my 7 parishes have just about held their first online SNAP meeting. I think Friday we've got Cromer's first one, along with Norfolk's second one on Friday night. So that's work in progress. You're probably aware before COVID we held the 6 monthly parish meetings. With the loss of the PCSOs that used to manage a lot of the liaison with parish councils, the parish council have all got our contact details, but actually it's trying to get out and give them a policing update every 6 months. So we held some really good events, one in the Fakenham Holt and Wells area, and then one in North Walsham to cover North Walsham, Sheringham, Cromer area. We invited all the parish councils, members of the public, and the policing team gave an update really, and an opportunity for the members and the public to ask us questions. So that was a really good event, and we're looking to hold those again in the future. We also do monthly parish magazines or newsletters. These will include all of the crime figures for a cluster of parishes. Now, they haven't been widely received due to the crime figures covering a whole parish, covering a whole cluster of parishes, that it's hard to break it down using our crime system into individual parishes. What I would say is there is police.uk where you can actually go onto your local parish. It will actually give you live figures of what is actually under investigation in that area. So we always direct people to, if they want figures, go to that particular website and on your particular neighbourhood. That'll give you some figures on there. Embedded in that monthly parish newsletter is sort of like an update from myself or the local beat manager, just to make sure you're aware of who they are, how to contact them, and what they've been working on over the last month and what we're going to be working on in the month to come. So they go out to all the parish councils, and ideally they would go up in all of the notice boards in the parishes as well, just so members of the public can read those as well. And I think I've already covered the last bit. So part of our role is to engage with all children's homes, hard to reach groups. We engage with food banks, all the different hard to reach groups like that, mental health hospitals. We've got 2 one area. And that's just all part of engagement, trying to get into these groups, build up trust with the police and to talk to the police. And we use it as a problem solving activity. So if we've got particular problems in one particular children's home, we'll work with the children's home, we'll work with social services and other groups and try and problem solve what the particular issue is and reduce crime that way. That's a quick snapshot of sort of what we do and the engagement. If there's any questions or anything you want to add, Boss?
The only thing I would say is, from a kind of my perspective, it's really good to see and encouraging to see the local teams looking at new opportunities and ways of engaging, especially in COVID times, so people don't feel quite so isolated, and using Teams and using some of the online platforms has been fantastic actually, and just allows us to retain that kind of engagement, because people's reporting and people's views around our priorities is really important for the local teams to factor in how we conduct our activity. So that's it really.
I think just one thing to add is obviously part of building that trust in the community, like I said earlier, is about gaining intelligence. We get a lot of intelligence coming now from people in the community now trust their local beat manager and actually think, I could tell him, I trust him, he'll do the right thing. And as a result of community intelligence, we're probably swearing out at least one search warrant a week from the magistrates. So I review all the intelligence on a sort of weekly basis for our intelligence officers. And we're now executing drug warrants on a regular basis in North Norfolk based on intelligence we've gained from the community. So it's a really good sort of picture really of the trust in the community that we're building at the moment.
I think that concludes our presentation actually. So I think it's just if anyone's got any further questions.
Thank you very much indeed, both of you, for a very informative and interesting presentation covering, I think, a wide spectrum of interests across the district and giving us some fairly close focus and detailed information in relation to domestic abuse and some other categories of crime. This is a major statutory report that we have to consider each year in our programme of work. We have given it an hour or so of our time in our programme today. I'm prepared to flex a little bit around that. We've been going for an hour and 10 minutes on this topic. I see we've got 4 hands up. I think if they are quick questions, then that might be reasonable, but I'm mindful that we have our other opportunities to take up questions with both of you outside of the meeting, and in particular, I will mention that raised by Councillor Fredericks, and we would, I think, like to see that responded to. And in fact, if I might ask informally for both the two councillors who have expressed an interest in that to report back to this committee at some stage with some feedback. I think we would all appreciate that, and that would add to the capacity that we will cover today. So for those who think that they've got an urgent, quick question, I'm quite happy to take that, but I really do want to wrap this up fairly quickly.
I think we had Harry first.
I'll be very quick. Is there any? I sit on a licensing subcommittee. I was surprised the other day we had talk on a licensing subcommittee. We were told of a licensee breaking COVID restrictions, but only when he was there for something else. I was wondering if we can share intelligence on licensees breaking COVID restrictions.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've got an information sharing agreement with Norfolk District Council anyway. We work closely with their licensing team. We've got our own Norfolk Police licensing team as well. We share information all the time, and that's something we can work on together. I mean, in terms of businesses breaching COVID, that does come under the remit of the NNDC COVID support officers anyway. They pick up the business side, work alongside trading standards, and we pick up the individual offences out on the street, so to speak.
And quite often, after we've developed the intelligence, we'll do a joint visit. Actually, you know, a combined visit, because it's so much more powerful to have that combined visit.
Great, thank you for that. Any other urgent questions that I see the three yellow hands raised at the moment?
We've got Christopher, then Andrew, and then I think Steve just wants to add something.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can, very quick question. Thank you both. It's been a superb presentation. Just around engagement, I know the Fakenham Town Council have been told that the police are not meant to use Zoom, though clearly you both are today. Is that a standard instruction? If so, is there any way that could be flexed? Because clearly Zoom is obviously the medium that many are using in terms of meeting and engaging at the moment.
It's a difficult one to answer, because we did use Zoom, so we used it, I think, as COVID restrictions first started, and it was our information security that had some issues around the security of the Zoom platform. So for those reasons, we moved over to Teams. So there probably isn't anything we can kind of do to change that unless the Zoom platform does. But we do have, and the only way we've been able to break outside it and to call in this meeting is we have, I think, a couple of standalone computers which have Zoom capability. And I think, Toby, you're probably using your own phone, aren't you?
Yeah, I use my own iPad.
So there are ways around it, I think, and I think it's sensible if them requests are made that we would locally consider how best to try to get around it, because you're absolutely right. It would be wholly wrong for us not to have that engagement that we want and you want because of a technicality.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Really helpful.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll take Councillor Brown and then Mr. Blatch briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, everyone. Yes, thank you for a superb presentation, Toby and Matt, at such short notice in the absence of the Police and Crime Commissioner. I just wanted to ask you, there's been a lot of media hype about people travelling into the area. We've heard at, at places like Horsey and Walcott, people visiting the coast to observe the seals and so on. With the message that we were advised to stay at home in the lockdown, there was no sort of instruction as to how far people could go for recreational purposes. As we move to now being able to travel further distance after the 29th of March, do you do you foresee a problem here that the government are not giving you clarity as to how far people can journey? And I know that some of your enforcement actions have been challenged and cases have had to be dropped for perhaps lack of clarity. What, in this respect, what could the government do to help you to police more effectively during the pandemic?
Councillor Brown, I did say briefly.
I apologise, Mr. Chairman. I do apologise.
I'll try to answer it briefly. I mean, you know, the fact that it's not defined means that there has to be local interpretation. And of course, as a force, the local teams look at the centre or our COVID team to try to determine what we consider to be the line, if you like. We've had cases of people travelling from Horsey, from Northamptonshire, from Peterborough, from Essex, and a plethora of different counties, which you know defies belief in some ways. But we've been quite robust in taking quite decisive action in relation to them. How it unfolds on the 29th of March and then the further de-restrictions, it's a big question for us at the moment, because obviously we're waiting for it to be debated at Parliament in the first instance before the team and the legal team for Norfolk Constabulary consider what our interpretation should be. But, you know, and we're talking about things that aren't completely defined. If campsites are opening from 12th of April and similar, it's gonna be, we're gonna have to probably, it's fair to say we're gonna have to modify our response in keeping with what the current restrictions are and the interpretation of it. Would it help if there was clearer clarity? Yeah, it would probably help, you know, and everyone will have their own personal perspectives on what is reasonable distance and what is reasonable travel. Of course they will, you know, is Norwich to Holt or Norwich to Cromer reasonable? So, you know, some people would say it is and some people would say it's not, you know, it's really is a difficult one for us.
Thank you. I'm sure we could discuss that all day and not reach one conclusion. Mr. Blatch.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to echo your thanks to both Chief Inspector Matt Dyson and Sergeant Toby Gosden. We do have a very strong operational and strategic working relationship with Constabulary. Sergeant Gosden is our Mr. Fix-It and deals a lot with Steve Hems and Emily Capps in terms of the response to COVID, seasonal planning around events and large numbers of visitors to the district. And we are expecting that this summer. The Constabulary also have 4 staff embedded within the District Council as the Early Help Hub, who do work with vulnerable members of the community around safeguarding around domestic abuse and violence. And I believe there is a county review around domestic abuse, so the police will be involved in our strategic county-wide level. So I'll obtain more information in that for Councillor Wendy Fredericks and Emma Spagnola. But I do wish to assure you that we have really strong relationships with the Constabulary, and if members have any local concerns, they can raise those with myself or Steve Hems, and we will seek to remedy those issues with Sergeant Gosden and his Safer Neighbourhood team, or Matt at a strategic level if that's required. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. At that point, I'm sure we've given it a really good hearing. You've given us a lot of information, a lot of things to think about, some things to follow up, and we look forward to hearing more about those at some stage in the future. So it just remains for me to express very sincere thanks for both of you for your time and your input today. And I'm sure you've covered the Police and Crime Commissioner's responsibility admirably on this occasion. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Olin. Thanks, Mr. Black.
Moving on, if we may, to item 8 on our agenda, consideration of any matter referred to the committee by a member. I think all of you will have known that I have been contacted by a resident in connection with a matter concerning the loss of affordable homes at Holt, and I took it upon myself to include that particular matter on our agenda today under this item. Principally because I think it would be useful to have a very brief where we are at right now from the Chief Executive, who has been in communication with that particular resident, and you will have seen that correspondence, and I think it would be useful just for the Chief Executive to bring us up to speed of where we are right now, and also for us to give consideration about how this matter might be progressed in some way, shape or form, subject to advice from Matt. So over to you, Steve, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So, as the Chairman has said, I hope you've received via Matt yesterday the correspondence that I've had with a member of the public in Holt regarding the loss of the affordable homes at the Norfolk Homes development on Cly Road in Holt. This was a site allocation through the 2011 site allocations plan. There was an outline application for consent for 82 dwellings on Cly Road in Holt, and the policy requirement was for 45% affordable housing to be provided. As I say, it was an outline permission gained by a speculative developer or land agent, and then the consent was sold on to Norfolk Homes. Subsequently, Norfolk Homes sought to submit Section 73 applications to vary some conditions against that original consent, which included the provision of affordable homes through a Section 106 agreement. Agreement wasn't reached at that time. There wasn't any deed of variation or change made to the original consent, in that the Section 73 consents which were granted made reference only to the relevant conditions and not the original application or approved development in its entirety. And subsequently, we haven't been able to reach agreement with Norfolk Homes over the matter of the provision of the affordable elements, such that it went to the High Court in August of last year. And whilst the council sought to defend its position, the judgment went against the authority in August. So the issue has been with us since that time. It was reported in the press at that time, and I think it is a matter of significant public interest that people do need to understand. So I asked Philip Rowson, Head of Planning, to review what had occurred in terms of corporate learning, whether there was any failing of individuals or process, and Mr. Rowson provided me with that report at the end of November, and I wasn't able to turn that around given the issues we faced with COVID during December and January. So I wrote to the member of the public in early March, detailing the circumstances and what had come about. In 2016, we had a new legal advisor, and systems and processes have been reviewed since, but the context of delivering affordable housing against the local plan is challenging. The original local plan in 2008 was highly ambitious in responding to the pressures of the local housing market. It was at a period that housing market was strong before the financial crash of 2008. And the council has, in response to nationally declining levels of housing provision, both market and affordable, in the period 2008 through to 2011, the council has adopted supplementary policies around a housing incentive programme, which sought to agree development at a lower rate of affordable provision for early delivery. And so the various proposals in the period 2011 moving forward have been considered in that context. North Norfolk has, and as I've explained to the member of the public, the North Norfolk has delivered ahead of its required housing numbers overall in the period since 2014 up to the present year, significantly above the levels which were seen in the period 2008 to 2013. And the scheme hasn't been delivered out by Norfolk Homes in its entirety, or it hasn't been delivered out. So at the moment, whilst there is a policy requirement for the 38 affordable homes to be delivered against that scheme, the scheme hasn't been delivered out as a fully market scheme. So the process is one of negotiation or position rather than non-delivery or loss. The Norfolk Homes have now submitted a revised application after discussions with planning officers and propose a lower level of affordable housing provision on that scheme, subject to viability assessment and other provisions. And elsewhere in the period since 2012, when the original scheme was approved in outline, the authority has sought to protect its position on some schemes by market schemes whereby off-site provision or a payment in lieu of off-site provision has been secured, where market sales values have exceeded the original viability proposal and payments have been made to the authority, and decisions are being taken around how those monies are spent. And particular schemes that have delivered quite large sums of money in that regard are the Hopkins Homes development at the former HL Foods site on Norwich Road in North Walsham, and indeed Hopkins Homes development at Holt, which were approved as enabling development for investment in Gresham's schools. So the Cromer Road and Grove Lane developments in Holt. So I believe the authority has sought to protect its position in the provision of affordable homes in the context of a changing financial and planning policy position. It's something that we can learn from, and I believe that in taking this matter forward, the correspondence and Mr. Rowson's report should be discussed and presented to the Planning Policy and Built Heritage Working Party, such that as the local plan moves forward through Regulation 19 consultation and hopefully inspection and adoption, the learning from this experience is taken forward by the authority and adopted in new policy moving forward. I'm happy to take any questions that members have at this time, but otherwise think that the detail is probably best discussed and owned in the context of the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blatch. I will hold any questions for the moment, just to allow Matt to give us some advice with regard to the remit of this committee and what guidance he can give us in constitutional terms. Over to you, Matt, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at this issue, obviously it has gone to the courts as Steve suggested. So in terms of what the committee can do and looking at an outcome from this, I just want to outline firstly that the committee's remit limits it in its ability. It's not able to look at quasi-judicial matters or regulatory matters, so that limits the scope to some extent of Scrutiny's involvement in this. What I would say, and a way that the committee could take this forward, is that there is a planning performance review on the work programme that was raised that we're hoping to get into in the new municipal year. And I would suggest that potentially we can look at the delivery of affordable homes as some part of that review. So that would be one kind of good way that the committee could kind of see this through and look to kind of monitor that. And then, as Steve has suggested, I think another good thing, I think it is already being done, but the committee could also recommend that a full report on the work that has happened. Steve mentioned that Philip Rowson has done a lot of work on this, and you've probably seen it in that correspondence email I shared with you, to inform members of planning policy of the full details of the situation and how it ended up as it did. So that's everything from my perspective. As I said, I think we can get it, bring it forward as part of a planning performance review in the future.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And in light of that advice that you've given us and the suggestions that come forward from Mr. Blatch, that's very helpful. I just want to kind of summarize, because I think we do need to be quite sure where we are. We clearly have had an investigation into this matter, and that investigation has been at some length, and an exchange of correspondence has taken place between the Chief Executive and the member of the public. But there's an acknowledgement here that there are issues that the authority needs to pick up and learn from. And I think given what Matt has said, what we would need to be satisfied with today is that there are ways in which those lessons are going to be carried forward, and that we have the opportunity in the future of ensuring that those lessons have been looked at and have been used to inform our processes and how we work for the future. So that's the key consideration today. And I don't think it's appropriate for us to get involved in any sort of detailed discussion of this. This is about how do we deal with this in a satisfactory way that will meet what are reasonable points that are raised by the resident, and we would want to ensure that those are responded to in the appropriate way. So I think there's a proposal on the table at the moment that we pass this to the Planning Policy and Built Heritage Working Group and/or the Development Control Committee, and that we pick up on those issues at a later point in our work programme, because of the fact that we've got the planning review, performance review already in place in our programme. I see 2 hands up. Happy to take those questions if they are quick around the issue of how we carry this matter forward. Councillor Brown first, and then Councillor Withington.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to say, I will look forward to this coming before my working party. I speak as the chairman of the Planning Policy and Built Heritage Working Party. And to say that I am pleased with the progress that the Planning Department have made in negotiating a potential 12 affordable homes. It must be remembered that the developer, after the High Court judgment, could have walked away, and on a strict interpretation of the judgment could offer no affordable homes and be legally compliant in doing so. So I am pleased that at least we have some form of compromise. And just in the form of reassurance, when I was portfolio holder for housing and planning policy, I did raise the issue with the former head of planning to look into a cold case review, in effect, of any similar planning applications from that era, when clearly the practice of dealing with amending or varying Section 106 agreements was called into question. And I can assure members that the council are not exposed in any way. A thorough review has been done, and there will be no, as it were, repetition of this kind of action from a developer in future, so far as the planning department are aware. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Brown, and thank you for that assurance that it will be handled in that way by Planning Policy and Built Heritage in the future. And certainly we do want to be assured that those lessons have been fully embraced and learnt, and the situation remediated as far as it is possible to do. Councillor Withington.
Right, thank you. This follows on a little bit from the training yesterday that we had. I wonder if when we do this planning policy review and it goes into the working party, rather than focusing on what's happened, that's happened in the past, I think that's clear. Can this review focus on exactly what has been put in place to ensure that it's not going to happen again? I know some things have already gone in place, so that's really good to hear, but really focus on that, so that's what we as a scrutiny can evaluate, whether we consider that enough has gone in place to prevent repercussions, and focus us a little more, I think. And I think that would be more helpful for officers in terms of their time as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Withington. Yes, and when we get further along the timeline, closer to that item, we will have the opportunity of scoping what that performance review needs to focus on. And I'm sure that this will be one of the things that we'll want to carry forward and make sure that when the working group and the committee have had the chance to consider this more fully, we'll then be able to take into account the actions that they have taken in response to that. So thank you for that. So there's a proposal here that we pass this matter over to the Planning Policy and Built Heritage Working Group and also to the Development Control Committee, and that we follow this through in the longer term with our planning performance review in our work programme. So that's the proposal that I will put on the table today. Do I have a seconder for that, please? I see Councillor Cushing. Matt, do you wish a formal vote or do you want a show of hands?
Yeah, I'll do a roll call.
Thank you.
So Councillor Dixon?
4.
Councillor Withington?
4.
Councillor Blathwaite?
4.
Councillor Fredericks?
4.
Councillor Heinrich?
4.
Councillor Mancini Boyle?
4.
Councillor Spagnola?
4.
Councillor Varley?
4.
Councillor Cushing?
4.
Councillor Brown?
4.
And Councillor Fisher?
4.
Okay, that's unanimous.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm mindful that I think we normally would consider a break after an hour and a half, around 11 o'clock. We've well past that now. So we've got several items on our agenda left, and I don't think we would reasonably squeeze those in if we were even to take a run at it. So I propose that we take a 10-minute break. I make the time now at 8 minutes past 11, and if we resume again at 20 past 11, that will give us time to have a break and return back refreshed. Okay, Matt, are you going to suspend the recording, and what do we need to do to sort of close down?
I cannot pause the live stream without having to start it as a separate meeting. So if I just ask everyone to mute their microphones and stop their camera.
Thank you.
Nigel, sorry to interrupt.
Yes, Pauline.
We do have another meeting at 1:30. Will we be finished by then?
I certainly hope so. But it's over to you, really.
Well, it's not over to me. It's over to the members of the committee, but
that's what I was meaning. It's over to members. Yeah, it's over to members. Brevity, I think, has not necessarily been uppermost in every member's mind today.
I don't think it has, no, but it was an extremely interesting report from the police.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah. Okay.
It fulfilled our purpose admirably.
Yeah.
Nigel, can I just say I'm going to have to go by 12:30 if we're still running by then. Sorry, but I have to be elsewhere.
That's understood. Hopefully we won't be far off at that point.
Okay, Nigel, it looks as though the committee are all back now.
Good. Okay. And then if we are all ready, then we'll resume then, please. Commencing with item 8 on item 9 on our agenda, which is responses of the council or cabinet to the committee reports or recommendations. Do we have any that you need to bring to our attention today, Matt?
No, there's none to report.
Thank you. We've already dealt with item 10. So moving on to item 11, that's the budget monitoring report for the period 10 of 2020-21. Councillor Seward, please.
Good morning, members, and thank you, Chairman. Duncan Ellis is with us today to answer the detailed or technical questions you might have. If I can help, I will obviously do so. I will also ask him to briefly introduce the report. It's been before the Cabinet. In terms of context, Council accurately trying to forecast and do council finances is a bit of a roller coaster business at the moment. We are, I've got a small overspend of 165k. I would like to hope that by the end of the year, we can balance the books completely. But we'll have to see how we go. But clearly, given everything that we're going through, if we can have things as narrow as this, that would be very helpful. So I hand you over to Duncan Ellis.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Seward. Mr. Ellis.
Morning, Chair. Morning, members. Thank you. I'll just give you a brief introduction just to follow on from what Councillor Seward has just outlined to you. But this is the budget monitoring for period 10. So it highlights the position for the revenue account and the capital programme to the end of January 21. And it provides a further update in terms of the financial impact of COVID-19. So this report follows on the previous financial updates that we've provided to members. So I think we did the original one in May, we had another one in August, and then a further report in November. So we were previously reporting a year-end deficit of around £1 million back in May, and that had been forecast to reduce to around 0.4 million by the end of the year. And as Councillor Seward has outlined, this is a more positive position that we find ourselves in now. It was highlighted back at the time of the last report that obviously these were still projections. They were based on a number of funding assumptions about the future around the income pressures and further government support. And the position wasn't clear at that time as to where we would find ourselves now. But the overall position is looking like an overspend of around £165,000 now at the year end, which is more positive. And we have identified that to be funded from the General Fund Reserve if required. But again, we will try and balance that position if we can by the year end without having to fall back on reserves. So just to give you a very quick update in relation to one of the other tranches of support we've received, that's in relation to fees and charges. And you'll notice within the report, we're forecasting around £750,000 to come from that area of support. And that looks at things like car parking income, and fees and charges that have reduced as a result of the pandemic. And very roughly speaking, for every £1 million we lose through those fees and charges, the government compensates us for about 75%. So that's where that £750,000 has come from. So that's a welcome addition, but the deficit is something that council will have to pick up itself. There have been a couple of positive benefits in terms of some of the grant schemes we have operated, because if you remember the original grant scheme, we received £65 million in advance of the schemes going live. Now that has been really helpful in terms of our cash flow. So while we were forecasting to actually borrow for schemes like the splash reprovision and also the acquisition of the waste vehicles, we've been able to delay that borrowing. So we haven't incurred the interest charges that we were forecasting. So that has saved us £350,000, which has been positive, and our investments have also had a slight upturn since earlier on in the year. So again, our investment income is looking to increase slightly. So when you take those two elements combined, that's had a positive impact of around 440,000. So that has been very beneficial in terms of the budgetary position. So generally, the report highlights the variances across the various budget headings at the moment, and we'll continue to monitor the position, and you will have a final outturn report that will cover off the whole year-end position over the coming months. So I don't think I need to say any more at the moment. Thank you, Chair, but obviously if any members have any questions, I will do my best to answer them for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Questions then on this report? Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Duncan, can I just refer you to page 21? It says at the bottom that £424,000 is requested for or additional funding request for the Cromer Pier. It says over the page that a paper is going to go to the Cabinet. Do you know when that paper will actually be sent to the Cabinet for consideration?
Thank you. It's coming forward over the coming months. We've got some consultants looking at the costs of the pier. I think members will recall we had some consultancy support that was put in place a number of years ago now, and it was trying to establish a more regular routine maintenance position for the pier. So there was a very detailed report that was done probably around 3 years ago now, and that was what the most recent scheme of works has been involved around in terms of the pier. And there is now a requirement on an annual basis to keep updating that report to make sure that the pier remains in good condition. So that next report will really bring together the key issues around the consultancy information we have, and I will be putting together a further package of works for the pier over the coming years, and that will be the request to Cabinet to finance that future programme. I would expect the report to come through in the summer, so it will be definitely within this financial year, and hopefully over the next few months.
Okay, if I might just ask one supplementary question. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. If I go to page 47, is that 424,000 actually included in the Cromer Pier Steelworks and Improvement line, which is about 2/3 the way down the page?
No, that's an additional request
That's on top
for
of that,
further
then.
works. Yes. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? I see no hands. If there are no other hands, there are 3 recommendations, I think, that have been made to Cabinet. And so, Matt, are we merely noting this report?
You can vote on the others to show that the committee agrees with those further recommendations, so that you're agreeing with that recommendation there to fund any deficit from the general fund and approve the capital funding programme.
Okay, and can we take those 3 together?
Yep, absolutely.
And do you require a formal vote?
Yes, please, with a proposer and seconder.
Okay, thank you. A proposer and seconder, please. I've got Councillor Heinrich and Councillor Fredericks in that order as proposer and seconder.
Okay, I'll go for the roll call. So Councillor Dixon?
For.
Councillor Withington?
For.
Councillor Blathwaite?
4.
Councillor Fredericks,
4.
Councillor Heinrich,
4.
Councillor Mancini Boyle,
4.
Councillor Spagnola,
4.
Councillor Varley,
4.
Councillor Cushing,
4.
Councillor Brown,
4.
and Councillor Fisher. Do we have
4.
Peter? Yep, cool. Okay, that's unanimous. Sorry, Nigel, you're muted.
Yes, moving on to item 12, the Sheringham Leisure Centre project update, March 2021. Councillor Gay, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee members. I just would like to say the report was originally intended as an invitation to members from ONS to maintain oversight of the construction project. I think we can safely say that the project is drawing towards a conclusion here. And you will see from the report which lies in front of you that we're still on target now for an August completion. You will see that the budget figure has remained unchanged for months on end. And the only real news, I think, is the news that you all already have, which is that the Sheringham Leisure Facility has a name now. It's no longer the Sheringham Leisure Facility. It is the Reef, and that's in acknowledgement of the landscape and geology of our coast. And I think, Chairman, there's really nothing further I have to add this morning.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gay. So we've got the report and the introduction. Any questions on either? I guess there are two issues really for us. Are you content to note the report? And are you content to remain with monthly updates?
I see nodding heads, Chairman. There's no objecting, it seems.
Right. Okay. So in terms of show of hands, is that what you would accept on this item, Matt?
Yeah, this one's just a note. Yeah.
Thank you. So if you're happy on those 2 points to note those, sorry, Councillor Spagnola?
I think she's just noting.
All right. Okay, fine. Thank you. Yes. Okay, good. Show of hands then for noting on that item.
Yes, it looks unanimous.
Thank you. Moving on.
Chairman.
Thank you. Moving on then to agenda item 13, which is the Norfolk District Council Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy for 2021 through to 2025.
We have just been joined by Officer Karen Hill, who I think is going to present on this.
Yes, do we have a cabinet member that's responsible for this or not?
I have an overseeing role at the moment, Chairman, but I'll let Karen introduce the report to you.
Okay, over to Officer Hill then, please.
Good morning, everybody. So you have before you a draft equality, diversity.
I can't hear you. You're not.
Microphone down.
Yes, that's better.
Sorry about that. So you have before you a draft equality, diversity and inclusion strategy, which covers the period 2021 to 2025. And we've put this strategy together as we're required to publish one or more equality objectives at least every 4 years, which are to help us to meet the aims of the public sector equality duty. And so in the strategy, what we've done is we've set out 4 equality objectives. But the Equality Act 2010 also requires that people are treated fairly at work or when using services. And so to reflect this, we've outlined a number of commitments in respect of the council's role, both as a community leader, service provider and employer. What the council has done over recent months is carried a number of motions which demonstrate that the council has a wider interest and concern. And so we have widened the strategy, expanded it to cover diversity and inclusion, which sit alongside equality if we want to encourage fairness in our communities. So the next stage is to undertake a formal consultation on the strategy and to develop an action plan, which we would envisage to be updated annually. There are a couple of key pieces of work which will further inform the development of the strategy as we move forward. A key one of those is a self-assessment of where we are in terms of equalities against the Local Government Association's equalities framework. But equally, I think using data analysis from the 2021 census, which should be available in a couple of years or so, which will further inform where we are and where we need to get to in terms of equality. And then, of course, the strategy is also going to be further supported by the development of a number of key strategies that we've got in our programme at the moment. So the engagement strategy, customer services strategy, and the quality of life strategy. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. But just before I throw it open to questions, I'm aware that it's 16 months, I think, since this matter was first raised at full council, and that was in response to a motion, and I think that motion identified that the policy was well out of date. So that's the past. And I think for various reasons, it's not been an easy route to this particular point, if only for timescale alone. I guess my considerations on this matter are around, this is pre-scrutiny, and therefore there are a number of stages yet to go. And I would hope that we would have some constructive input today that would be carried forward and hopefully appropriately incorporated if that's the right thing to do. One of the things that I do believe that is really important to get straight here, and is we started off with a policy. That's what we have in place indeed right now. This is entitled as a strategy. In your introduction, you mentioned the word strategy, I think, a good many times, because you linked it with other strategies that were supporting it. I guess I'm a little puzzled as to why this is not a policy document and is a strategy document. And I wonder whether there is an element of confusion that's creeping in here that will not help members of staff to understand policy and then understand the strategies that are being adopted to take those forward, and indeed the action plans that are usually associated with strategies, underpinning strategies. So I just wonder whether there is something that we can do in terms of terminology here. There's, I think, a need for consistency of terminology. So I do think we need to be clear about what is policy, what is strategy, what a charter is, what a statement is, and things of that kind. Otherwise, if I were a member of staff joining the organisation and having to read a number of policy documents as part of my induction, I would probably have some difficulty understanding and digesting. And this really is what I believe to be the key to a policy document. If a policy is being explained, it needs to be very clear, and it needs to leave the individual in no doubt about what the expectations are in principles and how those are articulated in terms of underpinning strategies and action plans and how those individuals can contribute to that. And it's also, I think, an expression of the culture within an organisation, how it supports the delivery of equality and diversity and in inclusion. So that's where I'm at the moment. I'm not a technical person to be able to comment on the technical content of it. I'm just looking at it from a lay person's, what do I understand from this document and how would that be digested by me and others best to help deliver on this. So I've said enough for now. Hands, questions, please.
We had Gerard first, followed by Councillor Fredericks, then Councillor Cushing.
Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to draw your attention to page 61. You must imagine how thrilled I am to see that my International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance motion has finally got onto a piece of paper. I suppose the question that I would like to ask really is, I understand these things do have a delivery time. I understand there's clogs up in different departments, but why does it take so long? I mean, I understand that we should have a reasonable delivery timescale for all of these motions. This one is pretty much, as the chair said, probably a year and a half. Surely these things can be speeded up and brought forward quicker. Thank you,
I think, Councillor Mancini-Boyle, your question is a fair one, but the fact of the matter is we are where we are in that. I think there are some issues to be taken up in relation to that, but for the purposes of our discussion today, this isn't really a post-mortem about how we come to be where we are. This is about the content of this. So if we can park your issue just to one side and maybe take that forward separately, would you be content with that?
Yeah, I'm happy with that because I do think this is quite an important issue.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Thank you.
I'm happy with that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fredericks.
Hi there, and thank you so much for putting this together. I can imagine it's taken a lot of work to get to this point, so thank you. I'm just asking you about application forms, of people that are applying for jobs. Have we any plans to exclude gender, titles or age from our application process so that we can be focusing on the actual skills of that person rather than the gender, age or whatever? So thank you.
Councillor Hill.
I wonder if it might be better for James to answer that question. I can see he's on the call.
Over to you, James.
Yeah, thanks all. Good morning all. So I think that's a very important consideration to do. We currently still use a paper-based application form. So by removing personal data from that does actually present us with a bit of a challenge about how do we contact people in the event of an interview. So I think it is valid and I think it is worth considering. I think it's certainly something that we can look at when we move towards a technology-based application process. But I think, but to support, so whilst we aren't able to do anything about it at the moment, it is on the radar, but I take a great deal of comfort in the fact that when we get to interview and when we get to a sift and shortlisting process, that it's fairly represented by a member of my team and the recruiting manager as well. So there's certainly, I take great comfort in the fact that there's lots of checks and balances in the system as much as we possibly can do. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cushing and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to reiterate the point I think you made in your introduction. When you read this, I mean, to me, a policy is that. It's a policy, it's a set of guidelines. If I go into my company's HR site to understand what entitlements I as an employee or customers are entitled to, it's fairly clear what you can and you can't do. When I read this, it does have an awful lot of actions in there. So I pick any random page. On page 61, it's got update its customer strategy, develop an engagement strategy, develop a quality of life strategy, which is all absolutely fine, but I don't think that's actually should be part of the policy. Those are actions and they should sit somewhere else. And I just wonder if we're making this probably a little bit more complicated than needs be. And also I just wonder, presumably all other councils in Norfolk will have an equality and diversity guidelines as well. So are we reviewing those as well? I mean, is there a sort of standard template that we can work from within the public sector?
Thank you. Officer Hill.
Yes, you would hope so, but I think our experience is not. So certainly in my involvement in the final stages of bringing this document together, I reviewed Norfolk County Council and Norwich City Council because I thought that they were more likely to have strong policies. They do have policies, but they are, again, not... it wasn't an example we felt that we could copy, if you like, to save some time. We had a working group that reviewed a number of documents from across the country and identified some good examples. And really to, I suppose, answer the question about, is it a strategy, is it a policy, is it a statement, is it a plan, what should it be? I think that to try and capture what we might want as an organisation, I felt that a policy was something that didn't particularly demonstrate our commitment to equalities, because it very much is a cold document, which is as Councillor Cushing mentioned, something that you would have in addition to a strategy, but a strategy is where you want to go to. It's an overarching document, so there isn't much detail in this particular document, but you would then have policies that you would have a policy for your staff, and you would perhaps have then as well have a policy for your services that would underpin the work that you do, and they are much colder documents, but because we have a requirement to have objectives, they don't quite sit as well in a policy as they do in a strategy. But also trying to capture some of the issues that as a council you want to take forward, like the Armed Forces Covenant, the Holocaust definition, things like mental health. It goes beyond equality. It's much more about diversity. It's much more about inclusion, and those things are kind of so intertwined in terms of the issues for our communities, that it was felt that to have a strategy that had a wider remit would help us on our journey towards being able to say that we do deliver on the equalities agenda. I think the other thing just to mention is that this strategy reflects on other work that we're intending to do. So the engagement strategy, the customer services strategy are work that we already have in our corporate plan as objectives to deliver, and they sit alongside this strategy. So in terms of how do we engage with our communities to ensure that people in our communities, hard to reach groups, have a voice, for instance, the engagement strategy is quite key to that, to ensure that we deliver equality in our the services that we deliver. Our customer services strategy is quite key. So it's about embedding equalities in those other pieces of corporate work, corporate strategy that we're developing. So they're not part of this, they're just links to other work.
If I may come back, Mr. Chairman, I'm fine having a strategy and obviously the action plans that would go with that. So it's actually just the fact is you've got, to me, they're two different things. One is a policy. Now, clearly, we're meant to update that policy every 4 years. Over the period of time, you're going to get legislative and regulatory changes which come in, which all corporate, public sector and private sector's bodies have to comply with. So I'm assuming the process of updating your policy every 4 years is to make sure you include all of those, and indeed add in any things which a council think are appropriate for the area within which we serve. So that's fine. So that's one piece of work. The other piece of work is the strategy that you mentioned, which is in terms of embedding those and promoting those, which I think is something different. I just think we're trying to blend the two things together has made that slightly more confusing. And I think the concern is, or the risk is, that we're going to end up delaying actually confirming what our policy is while we're trying to work on our strategy.
Thank you. I think you've made some good points there. Next on the list, I think, Councillor Brown, Councillor Heinrich, and Councillor Withington. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Karen, for your report, and congratulations on your appointment as the Assistant Director for People Services, and I wish you well in your new role. Just a query on page 62, there's a reference to the gender pay gap review. This is an issue which is of particular concern to me. I'm just wondering, this may not be the appropriate moment. It may be a policy matter rather than a strategy matter. But when will we know how successful the review is? When will we know the extent of the gender pay gap problem, if indeed the council has one? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. Officer Hill.
Again, I wonder if this is something that James might want to step in and answer. We do have a requirement to report against our gender pay gap, and that information is on our website, and I think there's information for the last 3 years. I think what it doesn't do sufficiently is actually tell people really what we're doing it's got a number of actions in there, but are they the right actions to get to where we want to be? But I'll see if James wants to respond further.
Just note, Karen, I think there's been a fire alarm at the office, so I think James and Steve, although they're still technically on the meeting, may be standing outside counting heads right now.
Okay, so I suppose one of the things when I was actually putting this document together, I did identify that I think there's some further work that we need to do in terms of the gender pay gap. So I think that it's the difference between fulfilling a requirement to do something, but actually making it meaningful. And really examining where it is that we want to be, and whether the actions that we have identified are going to achieve what we want to actually deliver.
Yes, thank you for that. Sorry, my phone's going now. Can I request, Mr. Chairman, perhaps a written answer from James in view of the interruption to the meeting because of the fire alarm?
We might be able to do better than that, Councillor Brown. I think you've raised a valid point that needs to be carried forward as this paper makes its way through the next stages. So perhaps that can be carried forward in that way and picked up, and you'll get your response via that as the document evolves, if you like. Are you content with that?
I'm content with that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Councillor Heinrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's following some of the similar vein to some other comments. I mean, it's a very thorough document. I have no problems with the content of it. And as a way of implementing a policy, it's very good. But what I still don't see is a clear, simple set of policy statements. And I really would like to see that, possibly as little as a page of A4, that just sets out very clearly what a policy is and then refers to this document as the mechanism for implementing that. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Heinrich, you make a good point, and I think that chimes with one or two points that have been made already. Officer Hill, do you want to comment on that, or do you still want to just note that particular point?
Yeah, I think I'd like to note that point. I think that one of the things that you've talked about is whether or not there are examples that we can look to elsewhere. And I think that we did some review of some other documents, but it seems to me as though I think we need to go back and do that again, just to get that clarity between the different types of documents and understand what it is that you want. Is it a strategy or actually is it a policy? And then as we kind of develop this agenda, we might move from a policy to a strategy at some point in the future.
I think you've got a good point there, and I think that does link up those comments that are coming through so far. I think we're probably looking at a replacement policy. That's where we started off this journey, actually. I am assuming, but I don't know, the strategies that we have underpinning the policy, and I would expect to see those strategies as the delivery direction and methods, and then, as we talked about earlier, specific objectives, and hopefully as many of those to be made smart objectives as we might, rather than aspirational. And for those objectives and action plans to be part of the review that we will carry out in terms of charting the progress that the organisation makes in the performance reviews that we carry out. So that would be some comments I would add to that. Councillor Withington, and then Councillor Seward.
Hi, thank you, Karen. This is a really encompassing document, and I think is certainly a good way forward. I'm going to take a slightly different tack to some other people. I agree that there is some confusion in it as to what's the strategy and what's the policy part of it. However, I just want to clarify a couple of points. For me, the strategy, and this is probably one of the most important strategies that we have in the council, because it determines how we deal with our residents, our employees, etc. I see it as an umbrella. Would you agree that this is the document that you're trying to produce here as a kind of umbrella that's going to encompass everything?
I think really that's what equality, diversity and inclusion need to be. It's very much what we want as a culture, isn't it, really, for our areas and staff. So yes, it is very much an umbrella document that needs to be reflected in everything that we do.
Yeah, right. And I think you've achieved that in here from my point of view anyway. And I heard you talking about earlier, you mentioned, and that relates to we need to be developing our customer service policy, etc., to be hanging. So I see those as being hanging off the spokes of the umbrella. Mm-hmm. So we need to get this right before we can get anything else right, can't we? So in terms of a policy, from my point of view, that policy can't come until we've agreed that strategy. That's how I would feel about it. I do agree with people in that I think from this there needs to come the separate idea of a very simple policy statement, and then from within your strategy the action plan will come. I don't think it will come from our policy so much. I think it will come from this strategy, and then as Nigel said, we'll be able to review and see whether we are moving forward in implementing this this document. So thank you for clarifying that. But I would like to stress to the members that I feel this document actually needs to be well established first, and then the policy comes from it.
Okay, thank you for that. Any comments you would like to make, Officer Hill, or are you content to note those?
I mean, I think that's how I see it, that we need a really solid statement of intent that sits at the top, which is an umbrella for other work that we do. And, you know, I think we haven't got that quite right. And I think, you know, I've come to this very, very recently, and I think that's why I wanted to see it as a document that's going to evolve over time, because I do recognise that it needs a lot more work in it. And so I'm not, you know, presenting this to you as an example of an employer or an organisation that's got equalities right. I think there's a lot of work that we need to do, and it's a journey that we need to, you know, to move forward on. So I think the first thing is to get something that we can then use to engage with other managers, service, delivering services, but also to the communities as well, so that we can start having that conversation to develop it into a document that we're all happy with.
Yep. Okay. I think we we understand that. Councillor Seawood, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just listening to what the committee's had to say, clearly the points that are being made about separating out the clear policy intent or a statement of intent and a strategy. Karen Hill is taking on those points, and we'll certainly have a look at that. It's very important. I suppose the only thing I can say, when I think back to my nearly 30 years of work in the race equality area, I saw plenty of fine statements of principle, and I saw an awful lot of very indifferent implementation. And it's how you go about turning that policy into a meaningful reality that is the crucial thing you have to do. In terms of the question that was raised about blind application forms, it is important, it seems to me, that the council knows people's gender and age. That's an important monitoring tool. We do need to see what kind of backgrounds and people are applying to this council for jobs. That's part of an equality approach. But you can, when it comes to shortlisting and consideration of applicants, you can actually remove some of that data so it's not seen by the people that are actually doing it. And that, I think, is the important thing that needs to be remembered. So I hear what James has said about technology, but there's been employers practicing blind application forms for a good many years without them necessarily being electronic. The third thing is about what Councillor Mancini-Boyle has said about the length of time. I suppose if my memory is right, no doubt somebody will correct me, when we discussed this over 12 months ago, the fact that we had an outdated equalities policy, I think, was something which I brought up in the course of the discussion. I do regret that it's taken so long. In an ideal world and in normal circumstances, it most certainly shouldn't have taken this long to get where we are today. But like this and with a number of other things, we have been blown away in certain areas with the resources available and how they've had to be diverted. But I can say to people that before this matter came before this committee, behind the scenes, some of us have been saying, look, as soon as we can find a bit of capacity, we've really got to look at this. We can't just allow it to drag on. It's council resolution. So certainly from my point of view, in normal times, I would not expect this kind of delay to take place. And if it was taking place, would be quite right for us to be criticised as the administration for allowing it to happen, because it shouldn't. So I just thought, Chairman, I would make those points just to try and round the circle. But I'd like to thank everybody for the contributions they've made this morning, and there's certain things I've indicated that Karen and officers will be taking away and no doubt coming back to me to discuss. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Seawood. That's really helpful. I think that adds a little bit of context to kind of where we are and why we are at this point. That's helpful. I don't see any other hands raised, so I would like to try and summarise, I think, where we are. As I said, this is a pre-scrutiny document. A number of points have been raised today, and there's some commonality between some of those, and I'm sure, Officer Hill, you'll find those helpful in the next stages in taking this document forward. I'm also, I think you mentioned, a working group, staff working group, or a focus group or something of that kind, and I wonder whether their input will be or has already been incorporated, but I think at some stage we would like an assurance that a staff consultation, I suspect, is something that needs to follow. So there needs, I think, to be an assurance that staff involvement has been as full as it needs to be. You mentioned the self-assessment exercise, and I know you shared with me that, and it's a worthy document, probably not worthy for us to go to today, but I think on another occasion, I seem to recall it was something in the order of 22 pages, and I'm sure it will cover a whole range of issues that we need to be satisfied on. So I think by the time this document gets refined, I hope that it will have dealt with all of those points to one extent or another. So from a pre-scrutiny point of view, I hope it's been a helpful exposure of what you have in draft, and hope that it will help to inform the next stages. So I think, just turning to the recommendation, Matt, we've got a yes, you are there, aren't you, Matt? You didn't have to go out on the fire call. The recommendation is to recommend to full council the formal adoption of the equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. I'm not sure that on the basis of the comments that we've heard today and the fact that this is pre-scrutiny, I'm not sure that we're ready to make that recommendation, are we? Hello, Matt.
Sorry, I was just waiting if any kind of members wanted to respond to that. I suggest potentially what you could do is, if members were supportive, alter that recommendation to just sorry, apologies. Suggested it be recommended to full council, subject to the comments being taken on board that have been made today, with the document amended prior to seeking full council approval.
Yeah, I wonder if we can put something along the lines to recommend to full council, subject to further stages of development. Because I think in principle, you know, we want this to be obviously put in place as soon as possible. And this clearly got the makings of that document, but there's clearly some stages that need to be gone through yet. And so I wouldn't like to imply that this committee is satisfied with what it sees before it today. I think that it has to have that provision for further revision, further changes to be made as it makes its way through those stages. Would that be a reasonable way of putting that?
Yeah, I will just note, I think that the actual policy or strategy, whatever it ends up as, hasn't been to cabinet yet. So even prior to it going to full council, it would go to cabinet first. So perhaps then I think in terms of that recommendation, to say that you recommend approval subject to completion of the self-assessment exercise that's been discussed, and consideration of the issues that have been raised regarding to identification of whether it's a, whether there's clear policy statements that need to be identified, or, consideration of whether it's a strategy document.
Can we just simplify that into further stages of its development, subject to further stages of its development, and that will be inclusive then of the outcome of the self-assessment exercise, what cabinet might think of it, what staff might think of it. Yeah, that would include all of those.
Yep, I've got that down.
So subject to that change, do you require a vote from us or a show of hands?
Yeah, it will of course be a formal recommendation. So if I get a proposer and a seconder and then go to a formal vote.
A proposer and seconder, I see Councillor Cushing, Councillor Mancini-Boyle, in that order.
Okay, Councillor Dixon?
4.
Councillor Withington?
4.
Councillor Blathwaite?
4.
Councillor Fredericks?
4.
Councillor Heinrich?
4.
Councillor Mancini-Boyle?
4.
Councillor Spagnola?
4.
Councillor Varley?
4.
Councillor Cushing?
4.
Councillor Brown?
4.
And Councillor Fisher?
4.
Okay, that's unanimous.
Thank you very much indeed. Then moving on to item 14, the Cabinet Work Programme. Matt.
Yes, let me just find it on my agenda. I think what we see on the agenda, there's now been a few more updates. So there's nothing on there that you're not really expecting. So you'll see the equality and diversity policy is due to go to Cabinet next month. So there's time there for some changes to be made. In terms of other things that have come up since the publication of this agenda, I've just been informed by the Democratic Services Manager that there will be a Community Renewal Fund report coming and a report on public protection orders. They'll both be going to Cabinet. And then not jumping the gun on the ONS work programme, we're expecting the Environmental Charter to go to Cabinet in May. So we have some kind of a little bit of an indication there what's going forward. Obviously that charter will come to scrutiny first for pre-scrutiny before it goes to Cabinet.
Okay, thank you. Any comments then on the Cabinet Work Programme? Are you happy to note that? Okay, thank you. Moving on then to item 15, the Overview and Scrutiny Work Programme. An update, please.
Yep, so just looking at next month, as I just mentioned there, we will have the scrutiny session on the Environmental Charter at next month's meeting. I think several of you at this meeting were involved in a workshop in the development of that, so you're already somewhat aware of it. As well, we have the continued Sheringham Leisure Centre updates, and something we've not had for quite some time is an Enforcement Board update. So I will be speaking to, I think Steve Blatch might correct me, but I think it's Philip Rowson that's been monitoring that in the for the time being. And then obviously after April, we need to look to have a session on pinning down our work programme items for the new year. From May onwards. I think we know we've got several things coming forward. We just need to map out where they fit into the work programme.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Any questions or comments? Councillor Withington.
Just a quick one. As part of that last item that you referred to, Matt, could we include in that a follow-up from some of the training yesterday? Because I think there's some implications for how we manage in the future the work programme. It was very interesting, Nigel, the last half. It was a shame that you weren't there for it, but it was good.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's definitely like a debrief and some learning points to take from that training that we can feed into the work programme, how we scope reviews, which reviews we do, and then how we gather evidence and all that, all those points. So yeah, I think it's very valid.
Good. I will catch up on that in due course, but thank you for that. So are you happy to content to note then the work programme as it stands for the committee? Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think that is the last item on our agenda today. We have no reasons to exclude the public or anything further. So it remains, I think, for me to thank everybody for what's been quite a long meeting today, but there's been quite a bit of meat in that, and it's been quite interesting. And we've had some very interesting contributions from the committee members. I think we can say that we've justly scrutinised those matters that have been on our agenda today. So thank you all for your various input, and I formally close the meeting.